We had a caller in the last hour who referenced body cameras, which is well topical in Twin Falls because there was a vote last night by members. I believe it was last night by members of the city council, and we have been hearing a lot about body cameras. Just this morning, I think the Heritage Foundation at its daily signal has a story saying that police would welcome body cameras in many parts of the country if it would help them at least tell the public how they do their jobs and perhaps put aside some of the half videos that we've seen that are actually taken by people in the public when it comes to interactions, and some of those interactions have turned deadly. We are joined in studio this morning by Twin Falls County Prosecutor Grant Loebs, and we have talked, I think, at two or three other occasions. First of all, welcome back.
Thank you.
Two or
Nice to
three
be
other
here.
two or three other occasions about body cameras, which you've pointed out is a little bit like looking through a straw. You're not necessarily seeing everything that's
Right.
the panorama that's going on, which is often happening if someone's involved in a policing situation.
Sure. And, we have some experience with this, even though body cameras are not common yet in our area or even in Idaho. But we, many years ago, of course, started putting dash cams on police cars. And what we learned very quickly is that the dash cam only takes photographs of what it's pointed at. And therefore, when you think, well, this is going to be great, I'm going to get pretty much a view of everything that happened, like a movie. The fact is, what you get is, and I like your analogy to viewing through a straw. You're going to get what the camera's focused on. Now, with the police car, you can pre-stage it and aim it, and of course, then if you get out of the car and you stop aiming it, it's fixed at the point where you aimed it last. And for like a roadside sobriety test, you can aim it to where you're going to be and hope you catch what you need to catch. With a body camera, obviously the person who the camera is mounted on is constantly in motion. And so you get assuming it's mounted on a chest or on a shoulder, you get what the chest or the shoulder is aimed at. If I have a body cam on my shoulder and I turn my head to the right and I look at somebody coming at me from the right, I don't see that on the body camera. There are some that mount on glasses. There are some that mount on, a hat or something, and that then you get what the person is looking at. But again, you only get what the person is looking at, so you don't get the same kind of panoramic vision that a human being has with their eyes. You don't have the same peripheral vision. So I'm not opposed to, as you just said, um, one of my old employers, the Heritage Foundation, put out a report saying police would like to have body cameras in some instances, and I understand that because police get accused of misconduct, and they think that if I only had a camera that day, then they'd really know what happened. And that is the good part of the body camera. It can provide additional information. It can provide additional information both to support police and, of course, to question police behavior. Uh, but it is not going to give us like a cinemascope view where we get to see everything that's happening. And I think people don't quite get that. And that's one of the problems with it. But there are of course others.
And again, if you're actually down wrestling with someone on the ground and you're rolling around, think about mounting maybe a camera on a beach ball, a
Hmm.
little cigar camera on a beach ball,
Right.
and that ball is blowing down a beach. You're not going to get a very good image of what's going on in the area. You're just going to get a lot of flop, 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 and noise, and just some very quick pictures,
Right.
jump cuts, if you will.
And you get bits and pieces, and um, there are of course ways to try to get that cleared up so that you can see what's really happening, either slow it down or take frame shots. Um, but all of that is technology, and hopefully that will improve as time goes on and people learn how to use it better. Um, I'm not that concerned about that. The problem with that is it all tends to make the police officer's word really irrelevant. And so if the police officer testifies, I saw this, I saw this, I saw this, and then this happened, well, the part that is going to be believed is the part that's caught on the body cam, whatever that part is. And the rest is going to be, well, wasn't on video. And so, it didn't happen. Now, obviously, if the policeman testifies in a way that is contrary to what's clearly on the video, then that's a problem. But y- we are steadily moving away from an era where a policeman's word on the stand under oath as a person who enforces the law and who is sworn to uphold it is now kind of not relevant anymore. And with tape recordings, with dash cams, with body cams, what we don't record didn't happen. And that is a problem because we can't record everything. We still need human witnesses.
Our guest is Grant Loebs. He is the Twin Falls County prosecutor. We have a caller with us. It's 912 and it's 70. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story. And you're up next on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. Go ahead.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. I consider this a pretty good analogy for this is go and watch a film at the movie theater. You see one or two characters on the screen, but what you don't see are the hundreds of people and the multiple operations going on outside of the camera's range. And that's what the real issue is. Exactly what you spoke to, Mr. Loebs, is we're going to trust that image that's on the screen, and Hollywood's great at fooling us all the time. Now the cameras, in this case, are not intentionally there to fool us, but there's so much going on outside of the range of that camera that the officer is reacting to and has to factor into all of his decision making to totally discount the officer. I think that is one of the most unfortunate things about this entire ordeal.
Right, and it will be the challenge of police departments and individual policemen and prosecutors to make sure that the jury understands that the camera, um, while useful and helpful, is a limited tool like everything else. And credibility of the officer testifying is going to continue to be a huge thing. And I hope that this doesn't result in the officer's credibility being always up for grabs. And if it's not on the camera, it didn't happen. But that's my fear. And of course, we saw some of that back when we went to the dash cams. I mean, if it was outside the focus of the dash cam, or if, say, the policeman aimed it at the area he thought he was going to do the field sobriety test, and he did it, and half a foot outside the view of the camera, well, then you get well, yeah, how convenient. He's just outside the view of the camera. Now we can't believe anything that he says. And that's, we have to keep in mind that um, the people that are going to be running these cameras are individual policemen. They're not, going to be Steven Spielberg. I mean, these are not going to be ready for cinema documentaries of what happened.
And, I want to thank him for the call, too. But last week, a law enforcer said to me, if I had to have my choice, I'd much rather just have an audio recording because audio recording will give you at least the interaction, everything going on between, the discussion. And in some cases, I remember, I don't recall where, just about 6 months ago, where a police officer was exonerated because he was accused of doing something and there was an audio tape, and the audio tape showed completely the opposite
Right.
had happened, and it cleared the officer at trial.
And again, I don't want to say that I think body cameras or any cameras or tape recordings are a bad thing. Um, we just have to make sure that we understand their limitations. And with all of this new technology, it creates additional um, complications. It creates additional problems. For instance, if I'm and again, with regard to what they're doing in Twin Falls, the Twin Falls police have gone through a long process and are still going through that where they try to answer these questions so that when they launch their body camera program, they have answered a lot of these questions. But the questions are important. When does the policeman turn it on? When does he turn it off? If he turns it on whenever he wants to, then obviously he's open to accusations that he did it just for his own convenience. If he can turn it off whenever he wants to, same problem. If he leaves it on all the time, well, then you have hundreds and hundreds of hours of tape for any given police shift, which now the question is who's going to watch it? Does it get watched or does it just get put on the shelf? If it doesn't get watched, how do we know there's not evidence on it that's helpful or helpful to a defense attorney and a defendant? That's a problem. How do you store it? Where does it go? How many millions of hours can be stored before you say this costs too much money and you start erasing things? And when you erase things, you're potentially erasing evidence. Um, if I'm a policeman and I knock on your door and you've been beaten up by somebody, um, do you want me in your house filming you bleeding and crying and filming your property behind you and your kids as they run around? Maybe you don't. Maybe a beaten up woman in a domestic assault doesn't call because she doesn't want people to see her on TV. There are all kinds of problems, and we will, of course, work through them. But it has been my position that we have to take this slowly and analyze this and make sure that we're taking it step by step and answering these questions carefully.
Now, when my dad, and I'm going back almost 50 years ago, but when he was doing some law enforcing, he had a 38 snub nose on one side of his belt, and then usually a club they carried on the other side. Those were bulky enough.
Hmm.
That's all they had, though. And now you're wearing a vest. You've got the radio microphone clipped to the vest.
Yeah.
You've got a camera. You're walking around, and maybe even miniature computers. At some point, you can't even move with all of this
Yeah.
equipment.
Right? You got a transmitter, a recorder, a body camera, uh, still a club type device, a gun, a taser sometimes,
Can of
flashlights.
mace.
I look at policemen and especially on a hot day, and I say, oh man, that's a lot of stuff to carry. I mean, you're like a Marine with a full pack, running up the hill. I mean, there's a lot of stuff.
And you get in the car, and in the old days when they were driving vehicles with bench seats, you might have a large radio in there, but now you've got a console in the middle, you've got a computer screen in there, you've got a keyboard in there. So even trying to turn when you're sitting in the vehicle,
Yeah.
it seems to me it's a challenge.
Well, being a policeman is not it's not fun and games. I mean, it's a difficult job. Even when you have a boring shift where nothing happens, it's a difficult job, and that's you know obviously all of us on the right side of the law, our thoughts and hopes go out to these policemen who are out every day. And when we see what happened in Dallas and what happened in Baton Rouge, and I wish I could be confident that this was going to be the end of it, but I'm not. Um, we've in some ways we've turned a corner lately, and it's not a good corner.
We've got more coming up with Grant Loebs, Twin Falls County Prosecutor, in just a few minutes. It's 71 right now. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. More of your telephone calls, too, as well. Got a lot to talk about this morning still in the next 40 minutes. Talk a little bit about Hillary Clinton's situation and the FBI, as well as a bizarre story the other day about rights for farm animals, or really any animals that could be pressed potentially in court, and the problems that that could cause as well. Our studio guest is Grant Loebs. He is the Twin Falls County Prosecutor. He joins us on a monthly basis, usually the third Tuesday of every month, and spends some time with us. He's also available to take some of your telephone calls as well. In fact, I do want to remind people, if you've got a comment or question, too, just about elections, he is running for re-election. Election day is still a long time off between now and then, but things are pretty quiet right now on campaigning as far as your
For
job.
most elections, they are. I think the Supreme Court election is the only one that's kind of still running hot right now. I know that there's a lot of campaigning going on for that, but that should be a close race.
There were at one time there were 3 or 4 or 5 people involved in that.
Right, and the primary eliminates all but 2.
Right.
Unless somebody got 50% plus 1 in the primary, then the top 2 finishers go on to the general election. Even though obviously it's not a partisan race, but that ensures that whoever wins gets a majority.
And we had one of those candidates from right here in Twin Falls, if I recall.
Robin Brody is from Rupert. She used to live in Twin Falls, but she lives now in Rupert, where her husband is a district judge. And then Kurt McKenzie lives in Caldwell, or
right,
Canyon County for sure.
Right, he's serving in the state Senate currently.
He's resigned that position, but so he won't be back again. He's done with his Senate because this session ended and it won't start again.
We should point out he is the father of the new permitless carry bill, if I recall, in his role in the Senate.
Yes.
And we haven't had any problems with that since it became law earlier this month, to my knowledge.
No, because it really doesn't. I mean, there are a lot of changes in it, but it doesn't really change much, except for the city limits, within the city limits, restrictions. But from my position as a county prosecutor, it didn't change much because, the city rules are the city rules, and the county always had essentially permitless carry. I mean, you could always carry a gun on your hip for sure, and you could carry concealed in most county areas. Before this bill was passed. The difference is just within city limits mainly. I mean, there are other differences. I don't want to simplify it too much, but that's the main difference.
It's 926, and a telephone number if you'd like to reach us, 736-0300, 736-0300. Grant Loebs joining me, Bill Colley, on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. I sent you a link last week about a story. There are people who are arguing for animal.
It's the When Pigs Sue article, yes.
Giving animals the same rights as human beings.
Right. Well, and this is not a new thing. There have always been activists, animal rights activists, who have believed that animals should have the same rights as humans. I don't know if they'd say we're all God's creatures, but we're all creatures. And that idea is not new, and I can't imagine, certainly in Idaho, it getting much traction. And really, the effect of such a thing would be to make everything chaos. I can't imagine anybody actually enacting this, but crazy things happen once in a while. But I mean, if you run through your mind what would happen if animals had the same rights as humans, you'd have a real problem.
It seems to me that it's really designed to be an attack on the agricultural community.
Yeah. Sure it is. Agriculture and, well, any uh, any business that uses animal products of any kind, agriculture. I mean, leather works. You know, I mean, you can think of every place where humans treat animals as property. That would change if animals had the same rights as humans.
Well, the only way you could make anything like this fly in a courtroom is if you'd have to make Dr. Doolittle a real person, because you cannot you don't know what's going through that animal's brain. You
And as
don't
as
know
we
if
were
they.
we were talking off air a second ago, because you can reduce these kind of arguments to absurdity pretty quickly. With rights come responsibilities, right? I mean, what are the responsibilities of animals in society? If we have rights, if they're treated the same as humans, um, do we prosecute them when they commit crimes as we do with humans? I mean, I had a nice garden gnome in my front yard, and the neighbor's dog came and took it. I mean, what is that? I mean, do I prosecute the dog? I mean, it's absurd, and I hate to waste too much more time in your show on it, but I guess strange things happen, and it's the subject of a story about the people who are pushing to get animals declared as people, to get personhood, and I guess we can continue to watch it, but I
It, it,
really
it
don't
just
see it happening.
it just I think it shows people just how more complex people are trying to make
Yes.
society,
Yeah.
and we don't necessarily need all of that complexity.
And I say all this as a person who likes animals. I don't have anything. I don't want to make life cruel for them. I don't want to torture them. I don't want them to undergo any more um, pain than they have to. And we do have statutes on the books in Idaho that take that into account. I mean, if you want to be cruel to an animal, that is in most cases a crime. Even when you're involved in agriculture business, you have to treat animals humanely, and I think that's justifiable. That's reasonable.
We've got more coming up with Grant Loebs, Twin Falls County Prosecutor, and your telephone calls too as well. Hold on to the telephone. We'll be back in about 3 minutes. It's 9:30 and it's 69. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and News Radio 1310.com. Just a quick note before we return to our guest, Grant Loebs. I want to remind people that we have an advertiser at the radio station who is now the only locally owned independent hearing healthcare practice in southern Idaho. That would be Dr. Christine Pickup at Mount Harrison Audiology in Rupert. She reminds you hearing health and brain health are connected, and she also has been studying the research on cognitive health and hearing The most recent findings prove that when hearing loss is addressed with hearing aids, the effects of cognitive decline are greatly diminished. Hearing is critical for communication, for connection to others, and for overall well being. And now is the time to improve your hearing. Call Mott Harrison Audiology for an appointment today, 208 312 0957. Grant Loebs is in studio. He's the Twin Falls County prosecutor. Telephone number, if you'd like to speak to him today, is 736 0300, 736 0300. Okay, last week or the week before, big story nationally, FBI Director James Comey issued his report on Hillary Clinton and then said, I do not recommend prosecution. He's not a prosecutor,
No.
but his recommendation carries a lot of weight. A lot of people are scratching their heads on this one. What happened?
Well, it carries weight when the people want it to carry weight. I mean, if he had recommended prosecution, I guarantee you there would not have been any, because he doesn't make that decision. And so, I mean, this is wrong on so many levels. First of all, policemen don't decide who gets prosecuted, and that's what he is. He's in many ways the nation's top policeman, but he's a policeman. He's not a prosecutor. He doesn't make decisions about charging. I thought it was curious where he said no serious prosecutor would charge her with this. Well, again, not his call. That's up to the U.S. attorney, who we all know as a political appointee, and we've seen her and her predecessor react more as political
Mm-hmm.
people than as prosecutors. But we know that she wasn't going to prosecute Hillary Clinton. But the FBI director's comments were troubling in so many ways. For one thing, he says, "Well, the reason we shouldn't charge her is there's no precedent." Well, first of all, that's not true, and secondly, it's a stupid argument. I mean, if we pass a new law in the next legislature, I guess I should never prosecute it because there wouldn't be any precedent, right? It doesn't make any sense. You make precedent by following the black letter of the law, by following what the law says. And then, of course, you have this other argument he made, which is equally, if not more troubling, that we can't prosecute her because there's no intent. Well, the problem is that many of the statutes that she violated don't require intent. They require that you are negligent or reckless. And then he goes on, or actually, he preceded all this by saying how negligent and reckless she was, but that she can't be prosecuted for statutes that require negligence and recklessness because there was no intent, which isn't required under the statute. So, it we shouldn't be surprised. We know what it was. It was a political decision. Whether he was pressured by someone else or he just didn't want to make this call or he didn't want to cause controversy between himself and the attorney general, I don't know. But legally speaking, it was an absurd statement.
This is because it goes back. People are trying to make a comparison to John Roberts when Obamacare was before the Supreme Court. We don't know what his thinking was,
Hmm.
but there's a belief that he didn't want to be the guy known, his legacy being known as the guy who killed this, and that
Hmm.
he would look too political. And that some people are saying Comey himself just wanted to wash his hands of this
Yeah.
for that reason.
Well, and that's possible. And I guess my answer to that is then you should have applied for a different job. If you were an insurance salesman in Dubuque, Iowa, nobody would call on you to make decisions that affected the national well-being. But, if you want to be the FBI director or if you want to be the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, the ball's going to be in your court sometimes.
I had a professor in college, and before I met him, he had been teaching at Penn State. And he told me the story of a student he had in class who was a football player, and the student was not doing well. He got a telephone call one day from Joe Paterno, and Joe Paterno said, I understand that, Jimmy is having a difficult time in class. I really need him for this weekend's game. And of course, if he doesn't pass the test, obviously he can't play. And that's the professor said, you're spot on. And then Paterno said, well, what are we going to do about that? Now, Paterno didn't say, don't give him the test. But Paterno was saying it'd be nice if you didn't give him the test right away. That kind of pressure may have been subtly applied at the FBI. I'm guessing.
Well, possibly, except he has his position is protected. He can't just be, he's got a term. But who knows? I mean, when you get up to that high level, and the FBI director is responsible to the attorney general in the same way that police are responsible to the local prosecutor. I mean, you can think that a charge should be filed, but it's the prosecutor and the attorney general's job to file it. So maybe he just knew there was no chance it would be filed. Maybe he was told there's no chance it will be filed. But the bizarre press conference where he first detailed all the ways in which he'd violate the statute. And then he says, but no responsible prosecutor would file it, and so we're not asking him to. Very strange. On the one hand, I mean, it does leave significant quotes by the FBI director about all the wrong stuff that she did.
We'll hold on to that thought, and we'll take some telephone calls too in the next segment of the program. Grant Loebs with us for another 20 minutes on KLIX. Grant Loebs in studio with us this morning. He's here for another 15 minutes. Bill Colley as well on News Radio 1310 KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com. Mr. Loebs is the Twin Falls County prosecutor. He joins us in studio on a monthly basis. He's also available to take some of your telephone calls. The telephone number is 736-0300, 736-0300. Now, we just had a conversation about James Comey and the investigation of Hillary Clinton's email server and some of Mrs. Clinton's, I guess, ancillary troubles that were around that as well. Media, of course, in this country, I guess is, you could say, not doing its job and that it's not following up on this. It applauded Comey for his decision for the most part. We say for the most part. Not all media is obviously the same. But here we go. You know, when we were talking about this, we've had candidates who've run for president, and after they were elected, they've obviously done things that were unlawful. Richard Nixon comes to mind. Lyndon Johnson was likely in that category. You probably could say John Kennedy and Franklin Roosevelt were in that category. But this is a candidate running on a major party ticket who has done things that would have obviously gotten a lot of other people in some serious trouble. If she gets elected president, there's no control any longer over this individual's behavior because she's already walked away and gotten away with this in the current or the present.
Well, I don't know how that's going to work. I mean, I think that the control over the person in the White House is basically the morals and integrity of the person in the White House. A lot of times, there are all kinds of things that the person in the White House can do with that amount of power. That is not something that you can immediately get a grip on, even if it's illegal. I mean, you've named some, and I'm sure you could name many more. I mean, of course, there are people who accuse, the second George Bush of doing things that were illegal. Obviously, there were things done illegal by Clinton in the White House. I think there's an arguable case that a lot of the executive orders and a lot of the things that Obama have done are outside of his authority. The question is who, calls the president to task, and there aren't very many ways of doing that. The Supreme Court can do it, but the Supreme Court doesn't have enforcement mechanism, and the Congress can do it through impeachment, but that's pretty extreme. And so, we rely largely on the integrity of the person in the office.
We have a caller with us, and caller, you're on the air with Grant Loebs. It's 946.
Yes, the thing I guess that strikes me, and forgive me if I'm backtracking here, but I've been unable to keep listening all the time. But when you see somebody that literally you feel like she has been skating and getting away with things for so long, and for a fact that if there was, at least ways you feel, if there was a prosecutor who wanted to do his job and wanted to do the right thing because it's America and we all seek justice instead of some political BS. And so when she gets away with this, the effect it has across this nation with the people. And then say, for instance, if your child is informed and they say, well, she gets away with it and we wouldn't. What kind of a thing is that? You see, the example is so harmful, and you're furious with this BS, and you want there to be justice. And I don't know, gentlemen, but it's very frustrating, and I'll hang up.
Can I add to that? And before you answer him, uh, you mentioned people are no longer believing, at least in some areas, police officers on the witness stand. You've got people who are gunning down police officers on almost a daily basis now. You have candidates getting away, as this person pointed out, skating with this. We are developing a culture, I guess, where we're losing all respect for institutions and the law. Uh, Victor Davis Hanson says culturally you can't survive when this happens, but we may be seeing it all unravel before our eyes right now.
Yeah. And I think that is troubling. And I think what those examples show you, and you could find examples perhaps on the other side of the political equation, but what you see is that especially hardcore activists, people on the extreme right, people on the extreme left, they don't respect the law as a generic statement of proper behavior. They use the law or attempt to avoid using the law uh, based on their political ideology. So, I mean, if Hillary Clinton had done what Hillary Clinton did, and I don't have all the facts, but the FBI director laid it out pretty devastatingly when he said we're not going to charge her for it. If she did that when there was a conservative Republican in office, she may very well have been prosecuted. And the question would be, well, is she being prosecuted because she's a liberal and she's running for president, or because she did something wrong? And that would be a legitimate question to ask. But it's obvious that she's not going to get prosecuted when there's a liberal president in the office with a liberal attorney general. And so the question is not just are powerful people skating, but is the law being used by people to prosecute things based on political position rather than on reading the black letter of the law? And we see that at the local level, at the state level, at the national level, people who advocate either prosecuting someone or not prosecuting someone, and you say, but the law is pretty clear on this. Either there is or isn't a case here. But the advocacy is based on what they want to happen, what social result they want at the end of the equation, rather than plugging in the laws and letting them work.
Rule by fiat. We have another caller with us. Caller, you're on the air with Grant Loebs. It's 9:50.
Good morning, Mr. Loebs. Hey, one thing I wanted to get your opinion on. It's in a utopian world that Lady Justice is supposed to be blind to everything, but it appears to me now that even the law is becoming partisan. If the guy you hate does not get convicted, it's the law's not working. But if your guy is getting accused, oh no, they're going after him. Is that where we're getting at? And also another question for you. The reservation, the Indian reservation over there at the one that came on the news yesterday. Do they have a viable thing? Because I know Idaho prohibits them from going directly to the federal government for assistance, which the state does not really provide any assistance at all for what they were supposed to do. So now, is there a way they can go to court, a federal court, and overturn what Idaho and planted on their territory? Thank you.
I'm not sure I understood the second part. Did you catch what the second
No,
part?
no.
I was going to ask him a question about that, and then he hung up. But I don't know that I caught the second part of the question. Was it about a reservation
It
or
might be the Shoshone Bannock.
Okay,
Yeah.
and the answer to that, if I understood that right, is you can go to federal court for things that have to do with federal issues. And if it's on an Indian reservation, I'm sure there's a federal issue involved somewhere. But I don't want to go too far down that road because I didn't really hear the question very well. On the first one, I think he was just kind of referring back to what we talked about before. Um, and I think there is a segment of society on both ends of the political spectrum that use the law as a tool to achieve political goals, and therefore they will ignore what the law says when it's inconvenient to them, and they will try to beat people with the law when they think they can get an advantage.
Sanctuary cities might be an example.
Sure, you can think of many, many examples, and i- that really, if that starts to pervade society, we have a real problem because the rule of law requires that law be, as the caller said, that Lady Justice be blind, and that it doesn't matter who the person is, who's accused, who the person is, who's a victim, whether the person is a popular or unpopular person. The law has to be applied equally to everybody. In as much as human beings can be fair, they have to be fair in applying the law. Otherwise, we have chaos.
Could someone do, and I know Jim Garrison is probably not a fine example of this, but could somebody around the country, perhaps even the district attorney in Westchester County, New York, because that's where this took place with the servers and email traffic, could someone come forward and actually say, well, you know what, if Loretta Lynch is not prosecuting, maybe I can prosecute? Could that happen?
I can't see that happening given the wholly federal nature of this law and of the subject matter that it has to do with. It is a law that's designed to protect federal records from abuse by people in federal positions. And I really don't see how that could happen. It might be interesting to see somebody try, but I don't think it would get very far.
And
I
it,
mean, under that theory, maybe I could prosecute Hillary Clinton. I mean, I'd get some press that way, but I just don't think that it would get past the laugh test.
And in the Southern District of New York, where the federal prosecutor is likely an Obama appointee,
Mm,
you're not going to get much traction, I would guess,
right.
either.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, when a president comes in, a president picks uh, the attorney general and the U.S. attorneys in all of these districts, and so Um, the president is the executive and he's responsible for executing the law. And so he picks these people who are agents of the executive. And so if you're going to actually get anything done, it's likely not going to be something that the president disagrees with.
Over time, going in and actually prosecuting cases will get more and more difficult if we continue down this road, though. I mean, this is clearly the example it sets
Yeah.
tells you that there are two sets of rules, and that means people aren't going to respect the set of rules they're told that they have to follow. If I'm just a small time jewel thief and I come in, I'm going to say, well, I didn't jeopardize national security.
Right.
Uh, that's I know, a strange analogy, but we're going to have more and more of that, which is going to complicate the entire system.
Yeah, the system's getting much more complicated. I mean, it's a different world now from where it was when I started in this job. Um, you know, the I think things are much more politicized now. I think the internet and the blogs and the instant and really unreliable news that you get beamed onto your phone as soon as it happens it makes it difficult for law enforcement people and for government officials to actually do things the way they should be done. Um, it, and there are all kinds of special interest groups that want to weigh in on all these things. I mean, there's a very active movement across the nation that has gained a lot of traction to say that we incarcerate too many people and we should let people out or we should change our laws so that people don't go to prison. And they don't seem to notice the correlation between the fact that we have a large number of people in prison and the crime rate is way down. I mean, we can certainly turn that around and have fewer people in prison and a crime rate that's way up. But I think that people need to look very carefully at these systemic changes that they propose because they will pay dividends and they might not be the dividends we want paid.
We don't ask you often enough. We've got just a few seconds to go, but for people who would like to contact your office, I don't think we've ever mentioned that, but how do they go about doing that?
You can call my office anytime. Our number is 736-4020, and we're there all day, every day, all week. And I'm, I'd say my door's open, but sometimes sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't, and I don't know that I want a line outside it. But people with legitimate questions or just want to find out what's going on, they can always call.
I should stop bringing the tourists by, in other words.
Well, tourists aren't a problem.
They
Hostile
just
people are
they,
get kind of old after a while.
they just want to see the great view of City Park. That's all.
It's a good view.
Yeah, we want to thank Grant Loebs
Thanks
for
for
coming
having me.
by. And I do want to point out Rush Limbaugh next, following the news at 10 o'clock from Fox. Bill Colley with you this morning as well. And God willing, if the creek don't rise, I'll be back tomorrow morning, Wednesday, between 8 and 10 o'clock. Also, Raul Labrador will join us from the Republican National Convention in the 9 o'clock hour tomorrow.